Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. My guest today is Andy Vaughn, President and CEO of Alliant University. Andy's a repeat guest of this program. He's been with me multiple times. We started knowing each other back at Trident University when I was a department chair and faculty member there, and he was the COO and later became its president. Andy's had a long and distinguished career in higher education, starting at National University in San Diego, and has served as regional dean, president, CEO, COO, vice president of marketing, etc. Andy recently served on the Negotiated Rulemaking panel for student loans, and he joins me for part one of a two-part series on the Neg Reg process, what's going on at the Department of Education, the upcoming Neg Reg on accreditation, and the resulting changes that higher ed institutions must make because of the OB3 bill. Andy, welcome back to the program.
Drumm, thanks for having me back again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. I am looking forward to our conversation. You've been doing some amazing stuff over the last few months with Neg Reg and OB cubed, all of those things. We're going to get into that in just a minute, but for those listeners who haven't tuned in to hear you before, give us a little background, please.
Sure. So I serve as president and CEO of Alliant University. We're a 7-campus system and an online school focusing primarily on graduate level programs that lead to licensure in mental health, K-12 certification, and health sciences, including nursing. I've been in this role for about 11 years, served as CEO and president of Trident University, where you and I met probably 15 years ago already. Can you believe that?
That was a while.
It was a while. That was back in Orange County in California. I've been in higher ed a little over 30 years, started on the front line in operations and fell in love with higher ed. I never intended to be in higher ed my entire career, just fell in love with it in my first 6 months, and that was 30 years ago.
Yeah. Well, you've done some amazing things. I remember from Trident, working on the business side of the house. I believe you came in as the COO, redid their marketing, their operations, stepped into the CEO role, worked through a number of the issues that were going on. I just remember nothing but you doing great things at Trident.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. We had a great team, and hats off to them. We were able to execute, which I think is what's lacking many times in higher education. Strategic plans are great, but unless you execute them, they mean nothing.
Really? I never would have. It's amazing.
I know, I can't tell you how many universities have these great looking plans and they're on the website. And well, folks, you got to execute. Let's track to that, shall we?
Yeah. And the plan that you made 5 years ago probably isn't going to work anymore.
Probably not. Probably not. You got to change, especially today. We're going to talk about that today too. And that is change.
Oh, yes. Big time change. And you've had a front row seat with that changes going on. Neg Reg. Everybody knows Neg Reg, negotiated rulemaking, etc. You had a front row seat for the latest one. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I served on the RISE Committee of Negotiated Rulemaking at the U.S. Department of Education in late 2025. It was about a 3 or 4 month process. And I just have to tell you, it was an amazing experience, probably the most amazing experience of my entire career. I learned so much, got to meet some great people at the department, on the congressional side, the U.S. House, the Senate, their policy advisors, policy writers, you name it. I just had a great time, very productive time, but also a very frustrating time at times in the process. And our task was, yes, I know, it's hard to imagine that.
It is.
when navigating through the federal government. But I can't say enough about the job that the department and all of my fellow negotiators did. But I was honored to be nominated for the committee. There were 3 of us that served to represent the 5,000 U.S. universities and colleges, and another 6 negotiators serving different constituent groups. And I have to say, we really all came together for what became a consensus, which is pretty rare in negotiated rulemaking, but we achieved that back in November of 25.
Consensus can be rare when it comes to the Neg Reg. So tell us about the process of being selected to serve on Neg Reg, because it's quite, if there's only 3 higher ed reps, and I would assume you came from the for-profit area, there had to be some other folks, private and publics, I would guess.
That's right. Yep. So the nomination can occur from different groups. It can occur from an individual. Obviously, you want to be nominated by somebody that the department recognizes, and got nominated by a former congressman, Jason Altmaier, who sent my nomination. And then the undersecretary, I believe, himself actually went through the nominations and chose, probably with some input from other department members, but got the call from the department back in, August of last year, and was thrilled to be selected, and just a great honor to represent all of higher education through this process.
And it truly is. Now, it took a lot of time to do this. You were very smart, I think, to speak with your board prior to convince them, because at that point, when you were doing Neg Reg for those 4 or 5 months, you were a part-time CEO in many respects.
That's right. I went to the board of trustees of Alliant University and let them know, hey, these are important changes. Matter of fact, what we're about to encounter in higher ed is probably the biggest change in the 250, 300-year history of higher education in the U.S. And I really thought it was important to be on the front row of that change, to impact change, and also speak on behalf of the institutions of this country, because I don't know that everything was right that Congress wrote in OBBB for higher ed specifically. And I wanted to make sure we got our voice through, and I think we accomplished that. But also I went to my board and said, hey, I know this is going to be intense. All eyes are going to be on this committee. And if I serve this, you're right, I'm going to drop down to probably a part-time CEO. And I've got a wonderful team at Alliant. They back me up. And I talked to my leadership team about it. The board approved it. Our shareholder approved it. And I'm so happy they did, because it was really important we had that seat.
It is. I've known other folks who have been involved with Neg Reg, not to the same extent that you were, and they all say it is an incredible experience. You get to see it from the inside perspective of what's really going on, but it is time consuming, and you have, in many respects, you've got the weight of the higher ed world on your shoulders, because some of the decisions that are going to come out of this are going to impact the entire 4,000 or 5,000 colleges and universities here in the U.S. and even overseas.
That's right. I've never been so emotionally exhausted than going through to the end of that process, because you want to make sure you take a thoughtful amount of time to hear everybody. And some schools were on this early. We started hearing rumblings about changes in Title IV back in February 25, when most people were paying attention to other stories in higher ed. Alliant knew early, just because of our history being involved in federal policy making over the years. We had our antenna up, and I was already making trips to DC back in February, March of 25. When the main story was DEI changes, that's also very important, but even more important is student loan funding. That's a game changer for institutions. Yes. We knew that was coming. We were on this very early, and so therefore, I was already flying out to these several times in the spring and summer of 25, even before OBBB manifested on July 4th. We knew that change was coming and tried to impact change before. That didn't work so much. And so I thought, well, our next role is to try to impact change and negotiate what should be done, both what the department needed, what Congress wanted, what the American public has been demanding for years, and then, try to have the institutional voice in that change.
And you've been involved with government before, correct?
That's right. So when the gainful employment rule first came out in 2011, I was working for an organization at the time that had just acquired I worked for an organization called U.S. Education Corporation, run by Bill Clowen and George Montgomery. And at that time, we knew that was going to be a major change for the proprietary sector, and studied that. I've been studying gainful employment since its inception in 2011. That passed, and we had to change a lot of things in higher education because of GE, and then it got held up in courts. It came out again in 15 and 16, got held up again. When gainful employment came back under the Biden administration, we're the only proprietary school in the country that's a Title IV doctoral clinical psychology institution. And it was getting caught up in this language that medical doctors, dentists, and osteopathy and a few other programs were getting this extra time for income measurement because of post-degree requirements. We had the same thing, and I had to work about 18 months for the department under the Biden administration to convince them of the same. We were ultimately successful in helping rewrite that regulation to include clinical psychology and other mental health licensure programs for extra time for income as they complete their post-degree hours. That experience actually led to this pathway. So they are very connected in statute and also experience, but more importantly, in relationships at the department, at the federal government, and more importantly, for this time around, this change is being affected by U.S. Congress, and that's where those relationships came into play here.
I'm quite sure that was incredibly important because you had a good understanding of how the department worked. You had an understanding of the legislative process, and you had a knowledge, sometimes, direct knowledge of the players involved.
That's right. I think this time around, this is where the current negotiated rulemaking, at least from the RISE Committee for Title IV changes, is different than anything in my lifetime in higher ed. Most negotiated rulemaking sessions start at the executive branch level, either from the president or the Department of Education, undersecretary or secretary. And you're running through a blank canvas of what changes could happen, how to write these new rules or regulations. This time around is very different. And it was very frustrating for a lot of colleges, and I'm very empathetic to them. But this time around, it was an act of Congress that dictated negotiated rulemaking. We had bumpers that previous Neg Reg committees did not have to work with. Even the current ones don't have to work with. So you can't supersede what Congress says. Congress speaks, the president signed the law. We have to follow that. That's just the rule. So we didn't have a lot of blank canvas. We had a very limited amount of canvas that we could work in to make it even a better rule in the end. But we didn't have the leeway that prior Neg Reg committees had. And that's the main difference here. That's why those relationships in Congress were really important, because if you really want to understand anything that Congress passes and the president signs, you have to go to the people that wrote the law and ask them, tell me more about this. What's the reason behind this? And then once you have that, it helps you negotiate the final language for the regulation.
Which makes perfect sense. OBBB, as you call it, made significant changes. In essence, it was a reenactment or a reaffirmation of the Higher Education Act with a new spin. Now, when I look at it, I go, okay, the reconciliation process is supposed to be for just about budget, but this one went much further than that. The Higher Education Act needed to be reauthorized. It needed significant changes, and this did a lot of that. What was the big intent from OBBB when it comes to higher ed?
The bottom line is the angst around student loan debt in this country, period, end of story. If you want to really point to the seminal foundational issue that caused this bill to be written, it's really, I could say, anger from the American public about how much higher ed costs. What is the value proposition? Is that still valuable to the American public? And what are the outcomes of universities? And, how much does it cost? Is it worth it? What is the price of education? And my gosh, our student loan debt is out of control. Let's do something to stop that. That is really the main reason that I learned from them. And by just asking, thank you, Captain Obvious, right? That's probably the reply most people might say.
Exactly.
Here. But it's still important you ask these questions. Even if you think you might know, you really want to still ask those questions.
Yeah. And higher ed, the loans, the 1.8 trillion in debt at this point is a huge number, but it's also about the delivery. And it's the delivery, the cost of delivery of higher ed that forces those numbers up.
That's right. And I think that's why you're seeing accreditation reform being on the next negotiated rulemaking committee that starts this May and June of 26 is, look, accreditors have been mentioned a lot by the Department of Education in the last year and a half. And a lot of that attention has been paid to the DEI aspect of some accreditors. And I think that's part of it, but I don't think that's the main story. And I think that's what gets the most attention from higher ed publications, unfortunately. It's still very important. Don't get me wrong. It's a really important topic, and we have to maneuver through that effectively. However, where the department, I believe, is going with accreditation reform is more about that value proposition. This is my opinion only, not that of Alliant, but my opinion, just from sitting in DC for so many months last year and talking to a lot of people that wrote the laws, that passed the regulations, my fellow negotiators, where I see the issue is not so much with institutional accreditors, It's more about the specialty accreditors that require certain infrastructures in their standards, which I don't think are bad, by the way. I think they're great for quality. But we're going to have to come to the table with the accreditors. Here's what I said on the record during Neg Reg, because when we were talking about changes to Title IV and new student loan limits, one of the department officials looked at me as a CEO and said, why don't you just lower your prices? I said, we're trying to. We would love to do that. We have some really innovative ideas to do that. But unfortunately, you're missing another party at this table that needs to be part of this discussion. That's the specialty program accreditors. If we're going to lower prices, we can't do that by snapping our fingers, because there's certain requirements for specialty accreditation that you have to have X, Y, and Z. I'm not saying we take that away. All I'm saying is, if we're going to be innovative, they have to be in this conversation with us, because if we're going to lower tuition prices, we have to lower the cost of delivery. Some of the most expensive programs in higher ed have very low margins at universities. It seems like, oh gosh, tuition's, yeah, it is expensive. But it's not like universities are in some programs are not making a whole lot of, it's very, very, very thin margins. Why is that? Because the cost of delivery, and we can't make a change on that until the specialty accreditors work with the institutions to affect that change. And we are determined to do that.
Mm-hmm. And so this next Neg Reg that's coming up about accreditation reform is going to be huge. Let's double back a little bit. The public angst in higher ed is around price, perceived value, and does it prepare students for the future or graduates for the future? You've had a number of conversations with Nicholas Kent, who is the Undersecretary for Higher Education at the department. I think I have that title right.
That's right.
There's a lot of stuff coming down the line. Now, he did not make him any friends when he spoke at the ACE conference just a little bit ago. But in conversations that I've had with multiple folks, those comments were perceived, taken out of context. It's not such a bad thing. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think it's important for the audience to hear what's really being thought about at the department and how it's going to improve higher education going forward.
Nicholas wants the best for student outcomes and to deliver education at a lower cost. And he's got a vision to do that. And so essentially, all Undersecretary Kent is saying is, look, we want you all to come to be a part of this change. And I told one of our specialty accreditors about 6 months ago, I said, hey, I know you're under fire. If I were you, I would come to the table with the Department of Education with some innovative ideas and be proactive before they come to you to say, hey, we've got some really great ideas on how we can affect change to maintain quality, but reduce the cost of delivery, and therefore ask institutions to lower their tuition prices. And so what Nicholas is saying is, hey, we are tethered, and I'm paraphrasing his quote. I'm probably going to destroy his quote, but you get the idea of what he said. He said something to the effect of, we are tethered to bygone legacies in higher education. And I believe he's right on that. Look, higher education is in some of the challenges we are because we don't change as fast as private sector industries do. As corporations. Really? I mean,
I'm shocked.
Every time we try to move cheese, people go, that's my cheese. What we're trying to say is, hey, don't just read that book. Just understand, not only moving the cheese, we might need different cheese. And so, look, higher ed is very resistant to change, more than any sector I've ever seen. Why is that? There's a lot. We could probably do a whole podcast on that alone, so I won't get into that. But we are still using things, as I told our team one day, I said, folks, the department is trying to get us into 2026 and get us out of 1926. We have to use innovative tools and technology. And, many institutions try to dip their toe in that pool, but sometimes it gets resistance from accreditors, not so much institutional, more program level. Sometimes it gets resistance from faculty or staff or boards. Higher ed just has to make some effective change. And, here's the thing about change. You're going to make some mistakes. Not everything's going to work. And that's okay. We have to give permission to folks to say, change is uncomfortable. And that means we're going to probably try some things that don't work. And that's all right. You have to give people permission. And I think what Undersecretary Kent is saying is, hey, folks, we're going to have some change in higher ed for the better. We want to bring cost and therefore tuition down. But we have to maintain quality. Now, let's all come together and figure that out, shall we?
Which makes perfect sense. We used to have a saying in the Navy, 250 years of tradition unmarred by progress.
Yes, exactly. Maybe the military is right behind higher ed on chain.
In many respects, it was. But there are many changes that have to happen in higher education. We want to increase enrollment, of course. That's important. But that is not the end all, be all to fixing the issues. That just puts a Band-Aid over the revenue issues. A lot of institutions have done tuition resets. Some of them gone well, some haven't, but it brings it down to a more realistic price, at least what you see on the website. How do we make those kind of changes that are necessary to reduce cost? You mentioned one, the programmatic or specialty accreditors, taking some of those requirements, i.e. a 12-to-1 student to faculty ratio and allowing that to increase. More use of distance education. I know one of the things that we've talked about, and frankly, I know it because I've got a lot of friends who are psychologists, the requirements for monitoring for, somebody prior to getting their degree, it can't be online. It has to be in person.
That's right. There's a few levers that we can pull with the help of accreditors to lower the cost of delivery, but still keep quality high. One of those is the length of program. Does a doctoral program need to be 120 credits? Maybe not. Could that be 90? That lowers the cost significantly. So there are some doctoral programs that lead to licensure in mental health that are a repeat of undergraduate degrees in that discipline. Could that be done in a different way through continuing education? Or if they already have knowledge, could that be more competency-based to not have to retake those courses? There's a lot of different ways to do that. That would lower the cost by maybe 20 or 30% in some cases of these degrees, and that's significant. You talked about technology. That's another place. So there are certain programs that lead to licensure in different states where training observation can be done via video. Does it always have to be in person? I don't know. Maybe not. Could that be utilized more through technology enhancements? The use of AI, we don't even know yet. That changes on a daily, weekly basis at this point. Are there innovations that are right on the cusp of happening that we could embrace in the near future to lower costs? Probably are. Also, you look at different aspects of hybrid and online learning that you mentioned. Facilities cost typically, depends on what state you're in. In California, it could run as much as 15% of your revenue. Facilities costs are huge in California and New York and other states. And so could there be more hybrid learning or synchronous learning online? Because there are some specialty accreditors that resist online. Most of them have come around, but not all. And that is huge for savings. But here's the other thing, Drumm. We are about to enter a time when Gen X and millennials are not who's going to school anymore. The next generation down is coming, and they grew up with smartphones in their hands. Right. They're growing up in the AI age. They are fully expecting that we're ready to embrace technology. And quite frankly, higher ed has not done that to 100%. Mm-hmm. We're lucky to get to 30, 40% at this point. This next generation of students is fully expecting us to be in 2026. Not 1926. And I think that's another key here on who we attract. So it's not just about lowering cost. It's also about staying relevant. And the other piece is not just the student side. It's relevant to employers that hire these graduates that want them to come out with competent AI skills, competent innovation, and technology skills as well. We got to be ready for that.
And we're not. You're absolutely right. I can remember in 2007, a colleague, I was doing a consulting project for Los Angeles Unified School District, and a colleague came in who had just watched the unveiling of the iPhone. And who would have thought that a new phone from Apple, Steve Jobs, would have had the impact that it has across every sector? You talk about the killer apps or the killer, the changes, the PC coming on board and Lotus 1-2-3 allowing managers to have spreadsheets to be able to track finances, track budget on their desktop. Huge, huge innovation. The internet, the iPhone, and now AI. It seems like these huge technology shifts are happening far more quickly, and higher ed's got to keep up with them.
Here's what happens. Higher ed's first reaction to most new technologies or new innovations is, how do we protect the institution? And that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. I think being compliant is absolutely required. Okay. But when you spend 80 or 90% of your time, and I think some institutions have, including ours at times, on, hey, how do we get our hands around this? How do we make sure, okay, all that's important. But equally as important is, how do we use this? How do we train with this? How do we teach students about it? And finally, I think that's happening in higher ed, but it took a couple of years to get there, because the initial reaction was, oh my gosh, this is awful. We got to keep it out of the classroom. Well, okay. Certain aspects, yes. And the ethical approach to ethical AI use is absolutely important. Absolutely it is.
Yes.
However, if that's all you pay attention to, you're forgetting about the other part of it, which is going to be huge in a matter of months or years. And that is, let's embrace it. How do we use this to increase student learning outcomes? But more importantly, how do we train our students? Because if we're training, let's say, a marriage family therapist, and we don't include AI within that training, then they're going to graduate and enter the field, either their own practice or work for a hospital or a clinic, and go, I don't know what to do with this. And it's impacting my revenue as an individual. We got to be teaching this now.
Yes. And there are some colleges who are teaching it. One of my guests, David Marchok, he and Angela Vertu have implemented AI in all of the undergraduate business courses that their college teaches. They've done away with book reading. They're using AI prompts to develop things, having AI create programs to where there is a marketing, they have to write a marketing strategy and programs to be able to track its effectiveness and make changes. I mean, some incredible, incredible things. We're not doing enough of that. And I think it comes back to something that you said earlier. We've got to be able to tell people it's okay to fail.
Mm-hmm. And that means failure on prompt engineering. The first time you do that, you're not going to be successful. And it's creating a sandbox where people feel safe to make those mistakes, learn again. Even at an institutional level, you got to tell faculty and staff, hey, we don't know yet. It's okay. Let's go ahead and try. Give them the tools and have people spend some work time learning how to navigate different tools. I finally subscribed to the pro version of Anthropic's product called Claude about 2 weeks ago. Blown away. I was a ChatGPT guy for a long time, and now I'm pro Claude. That'll change probably in a few months again, but it's important you just play with it. I probably spend a good half hour every day just trying out different prompts and looking at developing spreadsheets. And to your point, we have to allow this sandbox to exist at all institutions.
Mm-hmm. And there are some accreditors that are better at this than others. Without mentioning the names of those who aren't that good, I want to give a shout out to Larry Shaw at New England and NETCHI. They encourage their members to try new things. They work with them closely, et cetera. If you're an innovative university, Larry, I'm going to give you a plug here, my friend. If you're an innovative university, you want to try it, give Larry a call. He would love to work. He's not in the market of stealing other people's accreditation, but if you're an up and coming, he's an incredible guy to work with.
And I think that's where the department is going with part of this Neg Reg, is encouraging all accreditors, not just institutional, but programmatic and specialty as well. I think that's where some of the resistance is happening at that level of accreditation, in my opinion. And it's time, everyone. We need to take the handcuffs off. Universities have to innovate. They're going to make mistakes. Support them in that. Let's move forward. Success is not linear. As you've seen the cliche memes over the years, it's this squiggly line that goes back 2 steps, forward 5, back 1, forward 10, back 10, forward 15. And we have to be able to have those handcuffs removed to do that.
Mm-hmm. Are you getting the sense from the department with your meetings that is what they want to see as well?
It's a multidimensional approach. I think you've got this administration has their thoughts about DEI, and that's certainly going to be part of it. I still don't believe that's the main topic. I think it's a big topic, but I don't think that's the main one. I think what they're really diving into this summer, and I'm not on that Neg Reg, so I'm not privy to the details behind the outline of what they're going to be doing, but just in my conversations in DC and elsewhere with institutions, It appears where they're going with that is to really well define the value proposition of U.S. colleges and universities, lower the price of delivery and therefore lower the cost of tuition, keep quality high, increase access, and finally move forward to embrace innovation. Innovation is not always about technology. And I think when we talk about innovation, people already go to AI, and that certainly is a big part of it. But innovation also means thinking differently. We've not thought differently in U.S. higher education for decades and decades and decades. I know, big shock. It's time. So remember, I think here's the important part about this accreditation reform that the department wants. When they talk about innovation, I think people automatically think technology, and that is a big part of it, but it's thinking differently. Let's come together, be creative and be entrepreneurial and think about things in an innovative way. How can we deliver education differently to match not only what students expect, but also what employers that hire our graduates expect? And let's meet that at 100%.
Mm-hmm. And right now it's at 70 or 80%, according to surveys that have come out from Lumen and Gallup, from AAC&U. But there's still that area for improvement. And if we can make those improvements and lower the cost at the same time, that's a win-win for everybody.
That's right. And that's the department's goal right there. Let's do it at the same time.
Very good. Well, my friend, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm looking forward to part 2 of this, where we start talking about how you have helped Alliant make the changes based on the information coming out of Washington, things that institutions are really going to need to do in these next few months. In fact, I would say if you haven't started on it already, you're probably getting behind.
You're a little late, but not too late. We had a front row seat that enabled us to really hear what's coming over the next couple of years in DC, which impacts all institutions, and that really gave us a great head start.
Well, I look forward to that next conversation. 3 takeaways for presidents and boards. What do they need to be thinking about when it comes to what's coming out of Washington for OBBB? I'm sorry, it's hard for me to say that. It's OB cubed for me.
That's fine, however you want to term it. I know it. Number 1 is change is coming. There's no Hail Mary that's going to save you. You got to embrace this change. And I think institutions are wise to embrace it, figure it out, be creative, and dive headfirst into these changes and navigate through. If you don't do that, you're not going to last very long. Number 2, these changes are very permanent in nature. Remember, Neg Reg can go back and forth if it's an executive level only decision. Whoever comes into the White House next, either party could make a change very easily. That's not how this happened this time. It's an act of Congress. This is written in stone, not in pencil or pen. And the soonest this could change is probably 5 years away. I would say, I think this is actually permanent. These changes are going to last at least through the rest of our careers for many of us. So don't think that you're going to get this reprieve in the end. I don't think that's coming. So embrace that change on a permanent basis. Number 3, embrace your creative side. Encourage your team to be at the table to come up with these solutions. Soon we're going to be talking to a program group of faculty at Alliant in a program that will not receive the professional designation, where loan limits are going to come down, and we're going to have to lower the cost of tuition. But to keep that program with a surplus on the finance side, we're going to have to make some changes in expenses. But I don't think administrators can just do that in a vacuum. It's going to be requiring the faculty to come in with the program directors as well. Hey, let's figure this out together. How can we meet the needs of what's coming in Title IV in July of 26? And how can we do that together? Those are my 3 takeaways.
Thank you. Those are really great. And I'm going to add one to it is it doesn't really matter how the changes come about. The changes are there. Higher ed is very much collaborative. We want to say in our future, et cetera. We don't get that with this one. To some degree with the Neg Reg we do, but this has been dictated. You have a choice to embrace it or not embrace it.
Yep. If you ignore it, you're going to pay that price.
Absolutely. What's next for you? What's next for Alliant?
What's next is navigating the changes that take place July 1st. We've been working on this since last summer. We were working on it before OBBB even passed. We knew it was coming. We knew it would pass. And, private lending is going to be big for graduate level institutions, and that's about 99% of what we do. That's a big change. So talking to private lenders and also figuring out the biggest risk, I think, for this change for graduate programs is we estimate that 30% of graduate students will not qualify for private loans and programs that are going to need help beyond the federal loan caps. We also estimate that half of that 30% will not be able to secure a cosigner or don't want to. So let's say that's 15%. Another 5% may not want to take out private loans because of the interest rates and amortization schedules for repayment. So pick your number. Is it 10%, 15, 20? Yeah, probably somewhere in there. This is unprecedented. So we have no prior knowledge of data on what this impact is going to be. So graduate programs specifically really have to think about differentiation. And that's what we're working on right now. Deliver a better value proposition, figure out the private lending piece, how that might impact your institution. And those are really what's in the short term impacting us. Long term, we still have our vision of growth. We're going to talk about that in the next podcast specifically, but we've developed what's called Project Evolve. And Project Evolve is more about growth than it is subtraction. But you have to have your eyes wide open. It's not just changes at the federal government. Consumer demand is also changing. We have to meet consumers where they are as prospective students. We'll talk about that soon.
Sounds good. Andy, thanks for joining me today. I look forward to part 2 and continuing our relationship.
Thank you, Drumm. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for listening today, and a special thank you to Andy for joining me on this first of 2 parts. We'll be going into the next part next week. Hope you can join us for that one too. Thank you.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.